The envelope was sitting on the kitchen counter when I got home from the funeral. My Uncle Dennis picked it up before I could touch it, turned it over once and said, "You know she wasn't in her right mind at the end." I looked at him and said very quietly, "The attorney was there. He has the video." Dennis set the envelope down. And then I walked to my car and drove to a copy shop to make 17 certified copies of a document that was about to change both of our lives. If you've ever watched someone you love get slowly pushed out of what was rightfully theirs, I want you to stay with me until the very end of this story. Drop a comment below and tell me what city you're watching from. I genuinely want to see how far this has reached. And if you know someone who needed to hear something like this, please share it before you go. My name is Marisol. I was 34 years old when my grandmother, Elsa, passed away in the spring of 2021. I was the one who drove her to dialysis 3 times a week for 2 years. I was the one who knew which nurse was kind and which one was in a hurry. And when the will was read, I was the one my uncle decided to destroy. The reading happened at a conference table on a Thursday afternoon in late April. The attorney, Mr. Caldwell, had asked us all to be present, me, my Uncle Dennis, his wife Patricia, and my Aunt Rosa, who had driven in from Tucson and sat in the corner looking like she already knew something the rest of us didn't. Mr. Caldwell read through the standard language first, the language that meant nothing, and then he read the part that meant everything. Elsa had left her home, a 3-bedroom house in Riverside, California, appraised at $387,000, entirely to me. There was a pause that lasted maybe 4 seconds. I counted. Then Dennis said, "That's not right." He didn't raise his voice. He said it the way you'd correct someone who had written down the wrong lunch order. "She always said the house would stay in the family. She said that to me personally." He turned and looked at me like I was a houseguest who had overstayed her welcome by several decades. "No offense, Mari, but you're not. You're not a direct descendant. You're her daughter's kid. I am her daughter's kid. My mother, Elsa's daughter Carmen, died of ovarian cancer in 2014 when I was 27. After that, Elsa and I became each other's family. But to Dennis, Carmen's death had always been a legal inconvenience more than a grief." Patricia reached over and put her hand on Dennis's forearm like she was steadying him. My Aunt Rosa looked out the window. Mr. Caldwell cleared his throat and continued reading. The will included a no contest clause, which meant that any beneficiary who challenged it would be automatically disinherited of anything they might otherwise be owed from the estate. Dennis, as the son, had been left $18,000 in a small savings account and a 1994 Ford pickup that had been sitting in Elsa's driveway for 3 years without moving. He looked at the number. He looked at the house figure. And I watched something shift behind his eyes. Not grief, not even real anger. Just math. "We'll be contesting this," he said. That was the last thing he said to me directly for 4 months. I drove home in silence. I sat in my apartment and I looked at the ceiling for a long time. And then I made a decision that would change everything. To understand why Dennis felt so entitled to that house, I have to tell you about the 8 years before my grandmother died. When my mother was first diagnosed in 2012, I was 25 and working as a dental office manager in Pomona. I had a small apartment, a reliable car, and a life that was modest but mine. When Carmen got sick, I started spending more time at Elsa's house. First weekends, then whole weeks, then eventually I sublet my apartment and moved into the guest room so I could help full-time. Dennis, who lived 40 minutes away in Rancho Cucamonga with a 4-bedroom home and a good salary in commercial real estate, visited maybe 6 times in those 2 years. He brought flowers once. He cried at the funeral and gave a beautiful speech. After Carmen died, I stayed. Elsa was 78, newly a widow. My grandfather had passed in 2010, and she was struggling with grief the way old people sometimes do, quietly and without complaint, which made it worse. I told myself it was temporary. I would stay until she stabilized and then I would go back to my own life. That was 2014. I never left. By 2016, Elsa had been diagnosed with stage 3 kidney disease. I became her primary caregiver not because anyone asked me to, but because no one else was there. Dennis called every few weeks. He sent a grocery delivery service subscription for Christmas one year, which Elsa appreciated, and he came for Thanksgiving when it was convenient. He was not a bad person. He was a person who had built a comfortable life and saw no reason to disrupt it. I understood that. I just also understood that someone had to be there, and that someone was me. I paid $1,140 a month in rent for the apartment I still technically held a lease on for 14 months after moving in. I was afraid to fully commit, afraid to give up the idea of my independent life, before I finally let it go. I spent approximately $23,000 of my own savings between 2014 and 2019 on medical copays, household expenses, and the small upgrades Elsa's aging house needed. A new water heater, a ramp for the back steps, grab bars in both bathrooms. I kept every receipt in a manila folder in the filing cabinet in the guest room that had become my room. The moment I understood exactly how Dennis saw the situation came in the winter of 2018. I had gone to bed early with a headache, but I wasn't asleep. I could hear Dennis and Patricia in the kitchen, their voices low but not low enough. Patricia said something about the arrangement and Dennis said, "And I have never forgotten this. Mom feels guilty about Carmen. That's all this is. When the time comes, the house goes to family." There was a pause. Mari knows that. She has to know that. I lay in the dark and I thought, he genuinely believes I am here as a gesture of convenience, that I am being kept, that this is charity running in one direction. I told myself it was temporary. The feeling, the misunderstanding. I told myself it would sort itself out. It didn't sort itself out. What I haven't told you yet is that Elsa knew exactly what she was doing. In 2019, when her kidney disease progressed and she began dialysis, she asked me to drive her to an appointment alone, without telling Dennis. Not to her nephrologist. To Mr. Caldwell's office. She had already spoken to him twice before. She wanted to revise her will, and she wanted the process documented in a way that was legally unassailable. Mr. Caldwell recommended a capacity evaluation, a formal assessment by a licensed clinical psychologist, to establish that Elsa was of sound mind and acting without coercion. She agreed immediately. She said, and I remember this clearly because it was the most deliberately calm thing I have ever heard her say, "I know what my son thinks. I need this to be bulletproof." The evaluation happened in November 2019. Elsa passed with full marks. The psychologist noted her excellent recall, her clear articulation of her wishes, and her specific reasoned explanation of why she was making the choices she was making. The entire session was recorded on video. Mr. Caldwell kept a copy. I kept a copy. A third copy was stored with a legal document service. What Dennis didn't know was that the house had also been appraised, and that Elsa had been quietly paying down the remaining $41,000 on the mortgage with a combination of her pension and a small inheritance from her own mother that she had never mentioned to anyone. By the time she died, the house was free and clear. She had also, in the same session with Mr. Caldwell, signed a notarized letter explaining her reasoning in her own words, why she was leaving the house to me, what I had contributed, and what she wanted for my future. It was 4 pages long and written in the careful, slightly formal English of someone who had learned the language as a second language and always took it seriously. Mr. Caldwell told me, the day after the will reading, that the no contest clause was specifically designed to discourage exactly what Dennis was telegraphing. If he challenged and lost, he would forfeit the $18,000 in the truck. He called it a very clear-eyed decision on your grandmother's part. I think Elsa just knew her son. Dennis filed the lawsuit in June 2021, 7 weeks after the will reading. His attorney argued undue influence, that I had isolated Elsa, manipulated her, and used her vulnerability to redirect an inheritance that should have gone to her biological son. It was a serious allegation. It was also, given the documentation we had, not a strong one. I did not move into the house during the lawsuit. I stayed in a rented room in a friend's house and paid $750 a month, and I let the legal process move at its own pace. Mr. Caldwell had referred me to a probate litigation attorney named Sandra Okafor, who was precise and calm and whose fees were $4,800 for the case, manageable, given what was at stake. Sandra told me in our first meeting that the video evaluation and the psychologist's written assessment were exceptionally valuable. She said, "Your grandmother prepared for this." The hearing lasted 2 days in February 2022. The psychologist testified. Mr. Caldwell testified. The letter Elsa had written in 2019 was entered into evidence and read aloud in full. I sat at the table and listened to my grandmother's voice come out of someone else's mouth, and I kept my hands flat on the table in front of me, and I did not cry. Dennis lost. The judge ruled against him on every count. Under the terms of the no contest clause, he forfeited the $18,000 and the truck. His legal fees were his own to absorb. The house became mine legally and completely on March 8, 2022. I drove there after the ruling. I unlocked the front door with the key I had carried on my keychain for 8 years. I stood in the entryway and I looked at the hallway leading to the kitchen, the same hallway I had walked down 10,000 times carrying medication and cups of tea, and once, in a bad winter, a portable heater at 2 in the morning. I stood there for a while. The house was quiet. The light through the kitchen window was the same pale afternoon gold it had always been. I closed the door behind me. The first voicemail from Dennis came 3 hours after the ruling. His voice was tight, controlled, the voice of someone who had decided to be reasonable. Marisol, I think we need to talk. I think this whole thing got out of hand, and I think there's a way we can resolve this like adults. There were 4 more voicemails that week. They escalated in the way voicemails escalate when no one calls back. By the second week, the texts started. First reasonable ones, can we meet for coffee, I just want to talk, and then less reasonable ones. He told me I had taken advantage of his mother. He told me the house was supposed to stay in the family, as though I had somehow failed to become family over the course of 8 years. He told me that Carmen would have wanted this to go differently, which was the one that landed hardest, not because it was true but because he knew it was the most likely to get through my defenses. I did not respond to any of them. Not because I was being cruel, because Sandra had advised me not to, and because I had genuinely, by that point, made peace with not being understood by him. In April, 6 weeks after the ruling, Dennis showed up at the house on a Saturday afternoon. I saw his truck in the driveway from the kitchen window, and I stood very still for a moment. Then I went to the front door and I opened it before he knocked. He looked older than the last time I had seen him in person. He said, I just want to understand how this happened. There was something genuine in his voice. Something that, if I am being honest, made me feel briefly sorry for him, not for losing, but for having been someone who could walk through those 2 years of his mother's illness and truly believe that the most important thing happening was the distribution of property. I said, Dennis, I'm not going to have this conversation. If you need to reach me, please go through Mr. Caldwell. And then I closed the door. Not hard. Not dramatically. I just closed it. I heard his truck back out of the driveway. I went back to the kitchen and finished making dinner. By the fall of 2022, 6 months after moving in, I had repainted the kitchen the color Elsa had always said she wanted, a warm terracotta that she had shown me in a magazine once and then decided was impractical. It turned out to be exactly right for the light in that room. My neighbor, a retired schoolteacher named Gloria, had knocked on my door in May with a jar of homemade apricot preserves and the direct, cheerful manner of someone who has decided at 71 that life is too short for social hesitation. We started having coffee on Saturday mornings, first occasionally and then reliably. She had known Elsa for 20 years. She told me stories I hadn't heard, about Elsa's garden in the 80s, about a neighborhood block party in 1994 that had gotten out of hand in a funny way, about the way Elsa used to watch the street from the front window in the evenings, like she was keeping an eye on the whole neighborhood. I started watching the street that way too in the evenings, without quite noticing when it became a habit. I found a new dental practice that was hiring and started working 3 days a week. Slowly and then faster. I joined a Saturday morning walk group that met at a park 2 miles away, something I had not done, joined a group, done something physical for pleasure, made small talk with strangers in longer than I could clearly remember. My blood pressure, which had been elevated for years, came down. My doctor mentioned it at my annual visit in November, and I said I thought I was sleeping better. She said, "Whatever you're doing, keep doing it." I sent Dennis a holiday card in December. Nothing in it except a printed card with a winter scene and my name signed at the bottom. Not warm, not cold. Just a card. He didn't respond and I didn't expect him to. I wasn't reaching out for reconciliation. I was reaching out because Elsa would have wanted me to remember that he was still her son, and that some things can be true at the same time. There is an evening I come back to sometimes, one in late October 2022. I was sitting at the kitchen table, the terracotta walls, the last of the day's light coming through the window the way it does in California in the fall, golden and slightly sad. And I was going through a box of things I had never fully unpacked from the guest room. I found a birthday card Elsa had given me in 2017. One of those cards with a printed sentiment inside that she had crossed out and replaced with her own handwriting, because she never trusted what the card companies wrote. Her English was careful and deliberate. She had written, "You are not alone in this house. You are not alone in this life. That is not the same as being happy, but it is the beginning of it." I sat with that for a long time. I have thought about what it means to be alone and what it means to be lonely, and I have decided they are almost entirely unrelated. I lived in that house with Elsa for 7 years, and there were days I was lonely in a way that had nothing to do with her presence. And I have sat in that same house by myself, completely alone, in a Tuesday morning silence, and felt nothing that could reasonably be called lonely. What my grandmother left me was not just a house. It was the specific, irreplaceable knowledge that someone had seen me clearly, had seen what I gave and what it cost and what I was worth, and had made it official in writing in front of a lawyer on camera with a no contest clause. She didn't leave me the house to make a point. She left it to me because she trusted me with it. That is the difference between peace and happiness. Happiness comes and goes. Peace is something you build quietly while other people are busy making other plans. I turned off the kitchen light and went to bed.